Hey everyone, it's Matt here with Nightrun Studio, and in this video, we're creating a skill tree system. This system has room for multiple skill trees, unlockable tiers, and we'll be using scriptable objects to make highly customizable skills that can buff character stats or unlock new skills and abilities. In this first video, we're creating our user interface. Let's get started. Now, whether you've been following along with the whole RPG series or just joining us now, this video should work for you. Throughout this series, I'm using PixelFrog's Tiny Swords asset pack. You can find a link in the description, but whatever assets you're using will work just fine. That said, if you have been with us the whole time, you're gonna have a lot of UI junk on your screen right now. A stats menu, health display, level display. So let's clean that up. We're gonna create an empty game object here called UI Manager. And let's just drag the stats canvas on there so it's cleaned up. We're then gonna create a new UI canvas called the Skills Canvas. Before we can go any further, we do need to set up the scaler to scale with screen size. I'm using a reference resolution of 1920 by 1080, and if you go to your game view, you can see what your resolution is right now. This will just make sure that all the UI elements scale properly when you play the game on a different screen size. So let's create the actual panel now. We're gonna add a UI image, which we'll call Skill Panel. And then over here in the image component, let's add our sprite. This will be the background image upon which we lay the entire thing, and I'm gonna use banner vertical here. And when we first put it in, it's gonna be really tiny. So let's head over to our rect transform. I'm gonna set mine to 1200 by 1200, though you will notice that it's not quite scaling the same way my previous screen did, and the pixels look really tiny. Let's fix that. So first off, I'm just gonna grab my skill panel and move it over so it overlaps my other panel. Then I'm gonna go to source image and just take a look at the actual settings for this image. The first thing we're gonna look at is pixels per unit. I've set mine to 64, though this will vary, especially if you're using pixel art, and you'll have to find what works for you. I'm gonna be using point no filter as my filter mode, and this reduces blurriness, especially when working with low res images. If your image is discolored, changing the format to 32-bit should help. We'll then apply those changes and go to the sprite editor. You can see here that I've already sliced this image, taking this green box around the outside and moving it so it encompasses only the middle section. This is called 9 slicing, as it breaks the image into 9 pieces and preserves the visual integrity of the outside, especially important in UI elements. If you're using a traditional or pixel art sort of UI like this one, it becomes especially important as these pixels can really get stretched strangely around the outside if you don't use 9 slicing. All right, so let's click on our skill panel here now. And in the image component, we're just gonna change the image type to sliced. And then you're gonna have to decide on your pixels per unit. I'm using 0.35 as it gives me nice large pixels that I like the look of. I'm just gonna adjust the position here, and then while still clicked on the skill panel, I'm just gonna unclick raycast target. This is just what allows things like buttons to detect clicks. However, leaving images as raycast targets can cause them to block clicks later on, and so I just like to make it standard practice to unclick that when I'm adding new images. At this point, I'll just click on the skill panel, and I'm gonna add a UI image, and this is just gonna be the banner I'll put up top where the title of my menu page will be. I'm gonna use this yellow ribbon. It's the 3 slides one if you're using the Tiny Swords pack, and while it looks a little funny to start, I'm just going to scale this one up so that it's 1200 by 250, which will match the other image below. That said, you'll notice as soon as I put it at 250, all of a sudden my lower menu jumped up in front of it, doing some strange things. This is because the two are set to the same layer, and so they're kind of fighting for position. Now to fix this, what I'm gonna do is go to my stats canvas, and on the canvas itself, I'm just gonna set its sorting order. I'll actually leave this one at 0, head to my skills canvas now and move it to a higher layer. That way they will consistently render with the skills canvas on top. Next, I'm just gonna click on the banner, go to UI, and add Text Mesh Pro. Now at this point, I'm gonna go to my anchor presets, where I'm going to hold Option, I believe it's Alt on PC, and expand in all directions. At first, this will make things much worse, but if I turn on my gizmos here, you can see that the box has now expanded to cover the entire ribbon. I'm gonna name this text to Skills Title. And now I'm just gonna make this look the way I want. I'm gonna add Skills Panel, change my font to Bangers, make it black. I'm gonna go with the size of about 120 and then center the text. I'm also just gonna move the bottom of this box up just a little bit so that it centers here and looks good. If you're wanting to add any other features, I've also added an outline of white here with a thickness of about 0.3, as well as an underlay, which just gives it that little bit of a drop shadow look that I like. All right, so we're ready to start on the actual tree panels. So I'm just gonna right click on the skills panel here, create a UI image, and we'll call this one combat tree, or whatever you want your first tree to be. This image is actually just going to be the backdrop for the tree. I'm going to be using the carved 9 slides as my background, and I'm going to set its size to about 300 by 480. Depending on the image you use, you may or may not need to slice it. Mine looks all right as is, so I'll leave it, though I am going to uncheck the raycast target. Next, we're just going to make the title, so I'm going to click on the combat tree itself, create a UI image. I'm going to be using the blue ribbon 3 slides. I'll set this one to 350 by 110 and just kind of move it into place. I'll unclick raycast target. And again, I don't need to slice this one, though depending on the image you're using, you may. Now on top of the banner, we're going to add some Text Mesh Pro. I'm going to call this one Combat. Make sure that I name the actual text itself. And I'm also going to stretch this one to fill the space vertically and horizontally. And then as I did before, I'll make it bangers, do a size of black, set my size to 60 and center it. And then just do a little adjustment on the box itself at the bottom so that it's centered nicely. So now that we've done all this setup, we can finally start creating our skill icons. So the first thing I want to do is actually just make an empty game object on our combat tree here. And this is just going to house where the icons can be placed. I'm going to call it combat panel, though it won't have any image. And I'm going to stretch it to fill the entire space, though I'm going to put a fairly large margin on top so that we don't have icons showing up behind our combat title. Well, there's no graphic for this. We are going to add component grid layout group, which is what will put all of our icons onto a grid. And then we can kind of decide what size we want them to be. I realize that's hard to do when you don't have an icon yet, but I'm going to be going with 85 by 85 and just give it a spacing of 10. Now we'll actually create an icon so we can see what that actually looks like. I'm going to add a button here and call it skill button. And now if I just duplicate these, you can see sort of how they will appear on our combat panel. Now, obviously those are overlapping a little more than I'd like, so I'm just going to add a little bit of a margin around the outside so that they don't go all the way to the edge. And you can see that I can't quite fit 3 at a time. That's actually just because I got my spacing wrong when I was typing there and did 18 instead of 10. So I'll just maybe size it down actually to about 5. And then I'm also going to just change my margins to 10, and now things are fitting nicely, except that I want to center them to the upper center. All right, that's looking pretty good. At this point, we can delete all of them except one, as we're just going to make it into a prefab and duplicate it again later, so we don't have to make each icon individually. Now for this, you're going to want to pick what you want your button's background to look like. I'm going to be using the button blue 9 slides here, and I'm going to slice it and give it a multiplier of 2. All right, I'm just going to open up the skill button so we can see our Text Mesh Pro, which I'll call level text, and then down below I'm going to put 0 out of 5, just so we can see how many times you can level this up before it unlocks the next tier. I'll just make it bangers, and I think I'll just leave the rest for now, actually. At this point, I can actually go back to my skill button, where I'm going to add another UI image. This is going to be our skills icon. I'm going to stretch it so that it fills the entire space here, and then we need to set our icon. For this, I'm using simple RPG skill icons by YoungYokai, which I got over on itch.io. I'll leave a link in the description, and there's not a lot of icons here, but I like the way they look, so I'm going to toss those in for this video. I'm going to use a heart icon as my default. We'll say that maybe it gives you extra health or something like that, and then just set a margin around the outside. I'm going to go with about 10 to start, and actually I want it anchored just a little higher, so I'll make my top margin a little smaller and my bottom one a little larger. I'm going to unclick the raycast target. With that done, I'm going back to my skill button. We're going to go to UI image one more time. And actually here, what I'm just doing is making a backing for the text to go on so that it's a little easier to read. I'm going to set it to a transparency of 30. And then just going to drag it down so it sort of appears in the bottom right corner of the button. And then I'm going to drag my level text on top of it so that it renders above everything else. I'm then going to anchor it down to the bottom, which actually at the moment isn't going to look like it did anything. But if we change the size of our box, I'm going to go with a width of 40 and a height of 10. Then click the bottom and anchor it to the corner one more time. There we go. And that box on the back just kind of makes it easier to read. Now, obviously, we don't want to have to do this over and over again, so I'm going to make this into a prefab. To do this, I'm just going to go into my prefabs folder, drag the skill button down there, and it'll turn blue. At this point, we can just hit Command D to duplicate them until they fill in the slots. Later on, we can give these some individual identity, but for now, that's looking pretty good. So now what I just want to do is go up to my combat tree, and I'm going to use Command D one more time to duplicate it. I'm going to make my next one a magic tree, but you can call yours what you like, and then I'll just slide it over into place. I'm actually going to move both trees up a little bit, as down below I'm going to want to put our total skill points later on. If I click on the banner, I can go to my text, and I'll just rename it Magic. And then I'm also going to go to the banner and choose a red one so that we get a little different character for this. For the skill buttons, we could take some time right now to make all of the magic ones red backgrounds, that sort of thing, but we'll probably actually want to give these some individual character anyways down the road, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. That said, let's just make one so we can see what that looks like. So first off, I'm just going to call this one Fire Magic. I'm going to get my red button in the background, go to the skill icon, which I'll just pick a different image for. Let's grab some fire. I can also change my level text here, making it a single point unlock or making it locked altogether, and later on you'll have to get some other skill to unlock it. Now if you want to, you could take the time to make individual character for each of these buttons right now. That said, in a later video we'll be making scriptable objects for them, and we can also just wait and do it then. Now let's add our skill point counter. I'm going to create an empty game object here, which I'll call skill points, and I'm just going to kind of give it some size. I'm going to go 300 by 80. And if I click my gizmos, we can see an outline to show where that's going to be. At this point, I will give it a UI image, and I'm just going to call this icon. I'm going to use the button hover 3 slides here, and I'm going to stretch it to fill the space. This one doesn't need to be 9 sliced. I think I like the way it looks just as it is. I'll turn off raycast target though. All right, I'm going to right click on skill points, go to UI, and we're just going to add our text at this point. I'll call this one skill point text. And here you can just put whatever you want to call your skill points, and let's just for now say put it at 10 so we can see what that looks like. I'll stretch this to fill, make it look pretty. I'm going to anchor mine actually over to the right side, and then just give it a bit of a margin so that it stays within the outline. All right, that's looking pretty good. Now the very last thing we're going to do before we're done with our UI here is to click on our skills canvas and add a canvas group. This just gives us control over things like the transparency of every object in the group. So if I set it to 0, every object will become invisible. I've done the same for my stats canvas. I can also unclick interactable and blocks raycast to make it so that when these objects are invisible, they're not blocking you from being able to press buttons. Additionally, you can do a sort of fading effect to gradually fade in and out a canvas. For the moment, I'm just going to leave my skill canvas at totally opaque. And for those of you who do want to take the time to pretty things up, you can see this is how I've set my skill tree up for the moment, with distinct tiers within each of the trees. All right, I hope you found that one helpful. In the next video, we'll get into actually making it so we can unlock individual skills, upgrade tiers, and set point totals for each of these icons. Hope to see you in that video. Until then, this is Matt with Nightrun Studio. Cheers.